Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Behold podcast on the Genre Equality channel. I'm Hitzer.
Myself.
Welcome to a Refugee Week special on the 30th episode. Here, we want to discuss, some of the powerful films and series
Hmm.
that humanize the refugee experience. Some of these include, Iran's Persepolis, Syria's For Summer, uh, America's Immigration Nation, which is a documentary series, it's a nonfiction series. Finally, we'll also be discussing one of my favorite films of 2021, Quo Vadis Aida. This is a bit of a cheat, next month we're going to do, some of our best films of the year so far.
Yeah.
And I wanted to like also include Quo Vadis Ada, but like, there are like so many great films this year. I thought I would like just shove Quo Vadis Ada into this topic here because it fits, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely
Uh
does.
so why not, right? And I thought it was important also to recognize Refugee Week in 2021. um you know as of 2018, according to like the latest reports from the United Nations, right, almost 71 million people worldwide have been forcibly displaced by persecution, conflict, violence, or human rights violations, and things of that sort by the
Hmm.
end of 2018. That's an incredible number of people, and we live in an age where xenophobia is at all-time high.
Yeah.
At least for when I've been alive, I've never seen this amount of vitriol and hatred towards people who are looking for help. Otherwise, and COVID has only exacerbated that xenophobia. So it's
Yeah.
important to recognize and empathize the plight of refugees or asylum seekers, so to speak. Which is why storytelling is one of the best avenues, not only in terms of education and entertainment, but also in terms of empathy. So
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to talk about these four films here. I also would like to say that one of the films that we've already reviewed would actually have been a better fit here,
Mm.
Citizen Kane, which we put into our Valentine's Day podcast, but also a really really good refugee film
Yeah.
set in the 1930s, oh no, 1940s, and produced in the 1940s. That was really good too. Are there any other like refugee stories or refugee films that you've seen that maybe would fit this theme that we didn't manage to include due to time constraints?
Well, nothing actually comes to mind. Just because I've been watching everything this like last 2 weeks. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like it's recency bias. I can't really think of anything at the moment.
Of course,
Um.
there have been a lot of great films made by Syrians for Syrians
Yeah.
about the Syrian conflict. Of course,
Hmm.
the White Helmets is a really good short film that won the Academy Award.
Oh yeah.
I picked For Summer because it was a feature. It was a more lengthy thing and
Hmm.
a bit more different documentary style.
Yeah. True.
But there have been a lot over the years, and the plight of people all over the world, and these are just some of them. Let's begin though by one of the most popular ones, mostly because its graphic novel was so acclaimed.
Hmm.
Let's start with Persepolis, which was, of course, based on an emotionally powerful, dramatically enthralling autobiographical graphic novel made by Marjan Sastrepi, right?
Yeah.
It's a simple black and white graphic novel, but still very, very powerful, very effective, very bold. It has been adapted into a film, and I think the film is equally as good. It's based on Satrapi's own life, pre and post revolutionary Iran, and then her move to Europe. The film traces Satrapi's growth from child to rebellious, punk loving teenager in Iran. And in the background is the growing tensions of the political climate in Iran, specifically in the 70s and the 80s, the Cultural Revolution, with members of her liberal leaning family detained. Some of them are executed. And also, it plays out in the background with the disastrous Iran-Iraq war from that time period. But what I really loved about
Hmm.
Persepolis, and about all of his films is that they are not the people of this conflict are not delegated to abstract numbers or statistics.
Yeah.
You get to actually see on the ground real life first hand experiences. Persepolis gets to do that in a very unique graphic novel way and then in an animated way. Um, what are your thoughts on Persepolis? It's been a while since you've seen it. I think you've rewatched it recently.
Yeah.
How has it grown on you?
Um, I do remember like kind of vividly a couple of scenes from the first time I was watching it, right? And
Mm,
it was very exciting to kind of like revisit that again, because like many years has passed. I think I watched it. I don't know if I watched it in cinemas. I might have watched it in cinemas. But it's
mm,
been a good 14 years since then. So a lot of those things kind of like stood out in memory in a visual way, right? Like some of the scenes with a lot of humor, a little bit absurd, some magical realism going on, and like those scenes kind of leapt out to me when I was just searching my memory for it.
mm-hmm.
But now being older and kind of having maybe a better understanding of the world, and
Yeah.
having a better understanding of the Iranian Revolution in general, right?
Yes.
In the context of Arab Spring and all of that as well.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
it has changed my understanding of how it's told, right? Like
Mm,
there are a lot of like thematically a lot of things that it looks at that I don't think I recognized in the first place, right? Like
such as.
it's I think this whole idea about like deeply ingrained family beliefs, right? Like who
Mm,
you are forms very much part of the belief system of the people that are around you, right? Like and of course, uh, Mara Jane's own kind of like belief system is something that we get to see grow through her experiences along that, but also at the same time, the people who she interacts with, like the punk guy in Vienna with his
yeah.
nihilism and all of that. Like it's so interesting to see these things kind of interact and engage and be in conflict with each other and play out in day
Mm-hmm.
to day life, right? Like, and they're not just like these grand abstract ideas or concepts, that take place in like a philosophical theater.
Yeah.
And those things are things that stood out to me this time around a lot more than
Mm,
I began. I mean, it's so easy, right? Because Persepolis is such a pretty film. It's such a beautiful film.
yes.
The art style, it is immediately recognizable, even for people
Yeah.
who may not have read the graphic novel or even watched the film itself. Like I think if you look at the poster, for example, right, like it's
Mm-hmm.
something you've probably seen somewhere on the internet before, right? It is very very popular and was very popular when it came out, especially. So it's something immediately identifiable, but underneath all of that style,
Yeah.
right, belies a very personal and very intimate journey of one woman's coming of age.
Yeah.
And I think like that endears me a lot more what rewatching it after so many years.
Yeah.
And just like having a better understanding of the context in which the story takes place
Mm-hmm.
does fill in a lot of the gaps in my memory from when I watched it in 2007.
Oh, definitely. As you mentioned, the art style is so distinctive that I think a lot of my friends who have never seen the film or read the graphic novel immediately know the cover. Right?
Yeah,
It's such a cool cover.
yeah, it is.
Storytelling wise, it's also done in a very good and very real way.
Hmm.
Like it's a Persepolis is a lot of things. It tells a unique history about the political shifts that happened in Iran from the 70s to the 90s. It's a powerful statement against the opponents of free speech and
Hmm.
expression. It gives fascinating insight into the specific dangers that women face in both liberated and oppressed societies.
Yeah,
And plus, it's all wrapped up in a moving coming of age tale that is frequently funny and tragic. And told against a backdrop of strife and hardship that most coming of age tales don't have.
yep,
But most importantly, I think, at least for me, Persepolis is also the definitive movie of the immigrant experience and the unique joys and pains that come from living in two different worlds
yeah,
while belonging to none. It's a really good look at that. And I also really like the episodic nature of the film or the story. It starts with Marjan's childhood experience in Tehran in 78.
hmm,
She is a girl to educated parents who's like too young to understand why the Shah is being deposed, but
yeah,
she wants to celebrate it,
yeah,
and wants to join in anyway. And I get that, like we all have been there. And the end of the Shah's rule comes as a welcome change for her progressive family, and the release release of her Marxist uncle Anush, from being a political prisoner, I think it raises the family's optimism for a brighter future for Iran. But
Hmm.
this optimism doesn't last. As you mentioned, the Arab Spring as well. It doesn't last as a nation, which
Yeah.
kind of overwhelmingly embraced revolution just as quickly as it embraced a repressive Islamic government that forces Marjan and her mother and her grandmother into headdresses, the closure of universities as part of the repression of Western values. Most tragically, the imprisonment and eventual execution of Marjan's beloved uncle Anush.
Hmm.
And to top it all off, the nation of Iran descends into open warfare with Iraq, so that missile fire becomes merely a part of Marjan's just daily landscape. It's a norm for her. It's a devastating loss of innocence for the lead
Yeah.
character. But it doesn't crush the spirit. She sneaks bootleg music, the Bee Gees and Iron Maiden. She wears subversive clothing, openly challenges the propaganda of her teachers, much to her parents' chagrin. Um, so to protect Marjan, right, who's a bit too precocious for her own good, her parents make the heartbreaking decision to send her away to some family in Vienna. So it's at this juncture that I think Marjan's journey becomes the most intriguing and the most pertinent to our refugee theme. She
Yeah.
finds Vienna to be a much more liberating place than Iran, and as a result, she too finds herself that she is liberated. Like her enjoyment of simple pleasures like television, supermarkets are humorous, but her brief dalliances into nihilist and hippie circles, as you mentioned, of her peers, right,
Hmm.
are refreshing excursions into normal adolescent behavior. But it is in this period of her life where she runs up against the unique pain when you come of age in a place different from where you grew up, right?
Yeah.
Every act of maturing and growing into a responsible adult feels like a betrayal because it happens away from home. Like every embrace of the context you find yourself in now feels like you're abandoning the one where you came from.
Hmm.
And worse still for Marjan is the sinking realization that no matter how much she tries to embrace Vienna, Vienna will never truly embrace her. Her
Yeah.
friends are mostly interested in the unique context that she grew up in,
Hmm.
and they pay little attention to her as an individual. They treat her like an exotic pet almost. In addition, her dissatisfaction with life comes from a place of bourgeoisie privilege. I feel,
Mm.
like
Yeah.
the fact that she's far removed from actual oppression and suffering, the suffering that she knows she has grown up with, and she bumps up against racist view and people suspicious of her. Her fumbling attempts at young love also, ultimately cause her life in Vienna to fall apart, and she returns home defeated. So
Hmm.
a really great look at the immigrant slash refugee experience here. The good and the bad of the oppressed society, and the bad of the liberal society. Very even-handed
Yeah.
portrayal and very very authentic.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. What are some of your kind of like favorite scenes from the animation?
At the time when I was, well, I mean, I read the graphic novel first. I didn't read the animation. I didn't watch the animation until a lot later on. So I
Hmm.
read the graphic novel first in secondary school, I believe. And secondary school was my first foray into music that is not pop.
Mm.
And I found myself being like not influenced by Marjan, but also following a similar trajectory towards embracing punk and Iron Maiden and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I found that to be very relatable, despite the fact that our circumstances are obviously very different. And that has stuck in my head all the time. Like her jackets, the
Mhm.
bit of a posiness also. You know what I mean? It's really great lah. So those are the parts that are humorous and stick with me as relatable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's similarly for me. I think when she sings Iron Maiden,
Mm-hmm.
that particular sequence of events stick out in my mind as just some of the more like poignant moments, right? For her to be in this place and like she's trying to put her life back together now that she's staying
Yeah.
in Iran and go back to classes and all of that.
Mm,
Before she gets together with Reza and all of that.
mm,
Like that feels like definitive for me that she finds solace as someone with no voice in both her home country or in her adopted place of living in Vienna.
yeah.
How she finds the kind of like solace and identity within the music itself, which is fascinating to me.
Exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of kids feel that way. Like they find their solace identity in music.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, and I actually really really like that they decided to do that do the film animation style, because I think like it adds more to the story than if it had been done in live action.
Yeah. Again, it is so visually identifiable, right? Like it's
Yeah.
iconic in and of itself. For them to have done live action, I feel would have been a huge challenge just to
Mm.
capture some of the more whimsical elements of it, right? Like
Yeah.
no doubt, I'm sure they would have put together like a solid cast and a solid, kind of
Mm.
script and all of that. But I feel like it wouldn't have been in the same vein,
Yeah.
as what the graphic novel was trying to achieve.
Hmm.
But I mean, of course, that film doesn't exist, and so we will never know.
Yeah.
But all in all, like I think it was good. There's just something very stark about black and white animation that it looks so simple, but at the same time, like it's more than sufficient to tell the story.
Hmm.
And I'm glad that they chose to stick to that.
Yeah, yeah, like I actually also think that the animation de-emphasizes her racial characteristics. It allows her universality. Ah, fuck, I can't say it.
Universality.
Universality. Anyway, you know what I mean. I got
Yeah,
stuck on that word.
yeah.
Yeah, like it allows that to shine through, because she looks like any other character. She's just a human being, like you
Mhm.
don't see her through a racial lens, which is also important, and one of the most like creative avenues is the honesty of Marjan storytelling, because it allows us to see Marjan the person. Like, she's neither sage nor sinner. She's not perfect. She's human and frail. And it goes extremely personal in the nature of the story, that it's so personal that it makes it universal. I think, like,
Mhm.
unlike most coming of age stories that we see in Hollywood, for example, I think Marjan's story is compelling because it does come out of true strife and true hardship, and not the sort of
Mhm.
manufactured angst that we occupy in our heads.
Yeah.
And she faces this impossible task of wanting to not lose who she was while allowing herself to grow into the person she needs to be. um Really great film, and those are the things that sticks with me. The grandmother's advice, never forget who you are or where you come from, is told in such a way that it reminds us to not abandon her heritage or
Yeah.
reject her past.
Yeah.
Yeah, while at the same time also showcasing like the West has its values, but it also has stuff that's not so good. I think, yeah, that's what makes it so compelling as a character study,
Mhm.
as a story about an important part of Iranian history, and as a refugee experience. Really, really great. I
Yeah.
think a lot of the other films that we're going to be talking about, maybe because of its live action nature, may feel a bit too painful, or a bit too real, or a bit too just gruesome
Yeah.
to stand.
Mhm.
And this film, Persepolis, or if you want to read the graphic novel as well, which is very good, uh, gives it a bit of a distance and this artistic whimsy that allows you to take in the themes and the messages
Yeah.
and the empathy without being so defeated morally and as a human being, like to think, like
Yeah.
I mean, the next film we're about to talk about is painful to the max, so like
Yeah.
this one has a bit of a barrier there that may help it go down better.
Yeah, for sure. Of the four films, like this definitely is the most hopeful
Yeah.
in terms of what the story that's portrayed, and in terms of like the fact that she has a future, right? Like that's something that we know,
Mm.
because she grew up and she had time to write the graphic novel, right?
Yep.
Whereas we can't really say the same for the rest of them. Yeah.
Exactly.
Also, did you know? This is
Yeah.
also because like I've only watched the French version, but in the English
Mm.
version, Uncle Anush is voiced by Iggy Pop.
I read that in the credits, but I've not seen the English version either.
Neither have I, but somehow that feels very fitting.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah,
What a great casting choice. Good job. I now I feel like watching the English version
yeah,
because of Iggy Pop. Yeah.
Iggy Pop, and I think like Sean Penn is the father or something like. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The cast for the English version is quite stacked, surprisingly.
yeah. I'm curious. I'm curious because I've never watched the English version, but to see Iggy Pop play Uncle Anush, sure.
Yeah, sure, right? Moving on from Persepolis, which was our main topic, let's talk about Syrian film For Sama. It is a non-fiction documentary. For Sama is kind of both an intimate and epic is the wrong word, um harrowing journey, into the
Yeah.
female experience of war. It is sort of a love letter from a young mother to her daughter.
Hmm.
And the film tells the story of Wa'ad al Khatib's life through 5 years of the uprising in Aleppo, Syria.
Hmm.
You watch her fall in love, she gets married, she gives birth to a little girl named Sama. All the while, cataclysm and conflict is all around her. The recent Syrian civil war is undoubtedly, in my lifetime, probably the most horrific thing that has happened, like, in terms of this.
Hmm.
And she documents it all. She, like, what, just she uses a camera
Yeah.
basically, and captures incredible stories of loss and laughter and survival, as what wrestles with an impossible choice, whether or not to flee the city to protect her daughter's life,
Hmm.
when leaving means abandoning the struggle for freedom, which she has already sacrificed so much for.
Yeah.
This is an unusual refugee story in a sense, because Wa'ad does not want to leave. She wants to fight for Syria. She believes in her country, and she wants to stay back and fight ISIS. But she's so devoted in that. But the birth of her daughter changes her perceptions, right? Now she's living for someone else too, and that spurs her decision to become a refugee and move on. It's almost a f- it's almost a journal. It's almost a video diary
Yeah.
kind of film, right? Almost like a vlog that you watch on YouTube of just this one woman living daily in the most hellish of circumstances, just capturing the most raw and visceral and unvarnished stuff. Hospitals being bombed, children dying, her own life, that kind of thing. Um, it's so journalistically unvarnished that
Hmm.
it's hard to separate yourself from the plight of Wa'ad
Yeah.
and feel for her. I think this is your first time watching like something this harrowingly intimate, like documentary style.
Hmm.
Like what do you think about For Summer?
Uh, wow. It 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 was tough. It
Yeah.
was really tough to kind of get through it. It's been a tough 2 weeks. Let's
Yeah.
just that one go.
I imagine. Yeah.
But I think out of all of them, like for summer for sure is the most. It felt the most heartbreaking for me. There were just moments in time where I had to just put it on pause,
Mm-hmm.
and take a moment to just kind of collect myself. It has it has the nostalgia of one of those home family videos from back in the 90s, right, where
Mm-hmm.
your parents are trying to document something for you, like as you grow up, right, because like that's
Yes.
really the
Yeah.
only way to kind of do that, right, mixed with the immediacy of the social media age, right,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that she has available to her a recording device to document whatever it is that
Mm.
she is experiencing in that particular moment brings a kind of power, and again, like a power and immediacy to the footage and into the film itself,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a surprisingly potent combination, right,
Mm.
but on the one hand, like the intention to preserve something for your child, as
Yeah.
a beautiful kind of love letter, video essay,
Yep.
if you may, um, coupled with that kind of like on the fly at every moment, the internet today kind of social media thing, but for a more permanent reason and a more permanent message than your TikTok or your Instagram live stories,
Yes.
that we are fed today. It is very very powerful and extremely difficult to um absorb all at once, I would say,
Mm.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, my attention span isn't what it used to be,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, like there's just so much because it's so dense at any given point in time, right, like whether it is I think what stands out to me in particular is that every time a air raid happens or a bombing happens, and she's in the midst of it, and she's like um talking to these kids who have just run in from out the street and all of that, like there is so much being captured at a given point in time.
Mm-hmm.
None of them are trained actors, none of it are the sort. It is real and as raw and as visceral as it gets.
Mm-hmm.
but you as an audience have to take the time, and in that moment, right, like given how it's framed and how you are feeling, just witnessing some of the horrendous things that have happened to these people,
Mm.
um are experiencing that in the same moment that they are, it's not, it's not a retelling, it's not a flashback or anything of the sort.
Yeah.
And there's so much there to kind of unpack, that
Mm-hmm.
this makes, it belies the runtime, right? Like it's only 100 minutes, I believe, but
Mm-hmm.
there is so much in this, on so many levels, that it took me a while. Like I needed like a good couple of days to kind of like recover after
Mm-hmm.
watching For Sama. It was on my mind a lot. A lot of the scenes were on my mind a lot.
Yeah.
Before I could, like go on and watch something else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it is a uniquely it is a uniquely prescient work of art that I
Mm.
don't think I've seen in any other documentary,
Mm.
because it touches on so many facets of human kind and human being in just this
Yes.
one film.
Yeah. Specifically of this time period, lah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's a bit, of how, like, the documentation of Black Lives Matter, like, the makes it so much more intensely personal, like the videos of George Floyd, or of that, woman who got shot in a car, stuff like that. It just makes a big difference when the immediacy and urgency of it, like, is different. When you have access to social media and store and cameras, everyone can do this, right?
yeah.
I think that the thing that most strikes me about for Sama is when it begins, what is like so normal,
Mm-hmm.
like she is just this optimistic 26-year-old student, like that just has a cell phone and is just documenting things, and she's earning a business degree, and then like she's so wrapped up in this her country's movement, riding the glory of the Arab Spring, the rising protests against the dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad, and then her hope sort of slowly gives way to chaos, the destruction and the war crimes against humanity, committed by the regime and its allies, and then her options start to thin out,
Mm-hmm.
and the revolution seems like such a distant fantasy. And yet, like, unlike many, what like decides to stay behind and fight for a better future that she believes in. It's such a devastating scrapbook and a confessional journal of sorts, and
Yeah,
also a personal cinematic endeavor that is very different from like other documentaries like Cries from Syria, for example,
yeah.
which is very good, but also like a bit abstract and more of a historical crash course. Lah. Like what ultimately assembles her film here for her baby daughter Sama to explain why they decided to stay behind.
Mm-hmm.
There is, of course, a what if fear baked into the pursuit to capture everything, right? This
Yeah.
way, she'd at least have something for her daughter in case she or her husband, Hamza, who is a medic and fellow freedom fighter, um, in case they are abruptly killed one day, and some of the shots that she captures, like, they are basically like bunkering down in a hospital, right? And hospitals are being bombed, by ISIS or by Russian fighters. It's difficult to watch, but it's pieced together in such, a great way, especially, the thoughtful flashbacks
Mm-hmm.
that are accompanied by what's like exhausted, broken voiceover. It has,
Yeah.
everything. It has like the happy moments, like their disarmingly rosy wedding
Mm.
against the backdrop of a crumbling city, the birth of their children, countless near-death experiences, and many of them of the near-death experiences are so impossible to watch without tears because they're so such close calls. Um, her footage is so you
Mm.
are
Yeah.
there, so crushingly rich in detail that you only forget you're watching someone else's horror when random people break the
Yeah.
fourth wall, right? Like I think in one the most unforgettable scene in the film is a mother who's recently lost a child screams at the camera, right?
Yeah.
Wondering why she's being filmed in such a moment of unspeakable tragedy. And Wa'at doesn't quite respond, at least not in the footage that we see. Like, she
Yeah.
just knows that there are events that will help tell a story one day to
Mm-hmm.
her daughter and to anyone willing to listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible, harrowing, also very difficult to watch, but an important watch also. Like, if you want to understand the personal and human cost of the Syrian conflict, and not just in abstract statistical details.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's just a testament to arts, who
Mm.
she is as a person, and the character, and her character, right? Like, you don't it's not often that you can tell a story out of such great personal and national tragedy,
Yeah.
um in a manner that is so powerful, right? Like,
Mm.
so many times, like, whether or not we believe ourselves to be storytellers, we're far removed from anything of the sort. The
Mm-hmm.
stories take place in the theater of the mind,
Mm.
and we record it behind the safety of our our screens. But, like, to have been there, and to have experienced it, and
Mm-hmm.
to again, like, I'm constantly reminded for the fact that this was made for Sama, this is made for her daughter, right? And it
Yep.
will
Yep.
continue to effectively be that for all time, while at the
Mm-hmm.
same time being perhaps one of the best feature documentaries and most powerful and meaningful feature documentaries that I have ever seen.
Oh yes, yes, 100%. Like when it came out, the year that it came out in 2018, I believe. It was one of the most powerful films I saw that year. But a film that I would never rewatch. It's not one of those kind of things.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that I saw it lah. You can actually watch For Sama on the Projector Plus if you don't have to subscribe to it, actually. It's a VOD platform, so
Hmm.
yeah, you can catch it there. Oh, speaking of which, I have a recent article on Popwire about all the streaming services in Singapore
Yep.
that you can check out. The Projector Plus is on there as well as a lot of other places. I myself have learned a lot of new things about what is available in Singapore while doing research for this.
Yep.
And if you want to catch that, you can find it on popwire.com, or I've also posted a link on our Facebook page, so you can check it there lah.
Yep.
There's so much available in Singapore that I thought that was not available, but it is somewhere here lah. There is another, like if Hulu's not available, Disney Plus has it. For example, there's so much that I learned, and then like it's just another cable war lah. We're just spending more money on streaming platforms now lah. We thought like we thought we're cordless. We thought we're gonna save money with Netflix. No man, we just like are burdened with 100 new channels
No.
with an infinite
Yeah.
amount of content. Yeah. For
Yep.
Summer can be
So
found
if
on
you're
Projector
tired of
Plus.
Netflix, yep.
If you're tired of Netflix, of course, there's a lot of other great options.
Yep.
So you can watch this on Projector Plus, or a cool platform called I Wonder that I discovered, which is
Ah.
exclusively dedicated to documentarians.
Ooh. Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me just
So
bookmark that.
I wonder. Yeah. It only has documentarians from Asia, I believe.
Okay.
So yeah, very good resource if you're a fiend for nonfiction, which for Sama is. Speaking of nonfiction, I've recently complained a lot about Netflix nonfiction, about how
Mm.
at least the most popular Netflix nonfiction is like trashy, tabloidy, paparazzi garbage like Tiger King, or like a personal propaganda series like The Last Dance, or stuff like that, like stuff that like exploits people, or it's just like, or it's just like factually inaccurate, like Seaspiracy.
Yeah.
Was that what it was called? Yeah. Okay. First of all, right, Seaspiracy should have been called conspiracy. That is on the top, the surface level is like I thought. Why did you not call this conspiracy? Like spell it with an SEA at the back, right? That already was like, you're lacking something. And then I watched
Yeah.
it. It's like fuck it.
No, it is so bad.
Yeah, but that being said, that doesn't mean that Netflix lacks good nonfiction.
Yeah.
Your people are just not watching it because it's not sexy.
Hmm.
One of my favorite recent nonfiction series or docu series to come out on Netflix is a six-part documentary series called Immigration Nation. Immigration Nation is about America's 2019 and 2020 immigration system.
Yeah.
It is directed by Christina Clusau and Sean Swartz, and it features candid interviews with agents of ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, Border Patrol, and Homeland Security investigations, alongside detainees, as well as footage of raids and the detention centers. This is to give you a look at how cold and repressive and horrific Trump's immigration policy was.
Hmm.
Having seen at least half, I think you saw the first three episodes
Yeah.
of Immigration Nation. What is your opinion on this documentation on one of the worst aspects of the Trump presidency?
It is. It is definitely not an easy watch. I mean, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not done with it yet, but already, I mean, like, just the first episode alone is enough to kind of give you an idea of what you're dealing with, right? Kind of diving into immigrant nation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not an easy watch, but it is incredibly important. Like
Yeah.
so much of the time we get, we're stuck in this place where our news is fed to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you actually actively follow news sites, or you're getting it on Facebook or Twitter, or your strange conspiracy WhatsApp groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's very easy to think that what you are reading or what you're watching, right, at any given point in time is the end all and be all of the situation that's there. I'm
Yeah.
not saying the immigrant nation has like all the answers to this particular
But
crisis.
it goes deep, lah. He has first hand access to a lot of things, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think it's very important to kind of be able to see the stories behind the news, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that in a lot of ways not only deepens your understanding about what exactly has transpired or is going on, for that
Mm-hmm.
matter. Like I think it takes a very good kind of like objectively distanced view as
Yeah.
to the situation going on in the United States when it came to immigration.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to see the ICE agents and the detainees and all of that, being able to hear their stories without ever, I think as far as it is possible for a director or an editor, or the production company to interfere with what is being told, right? Like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the time, that's the problem with documentaries, is that you can never fully remove the eye of the director from it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and their choices, but I think they've done a fairly good job trying to be as distant and objective as possible. There's no like, there's no narrator that you kind of like uh focus on who gives you the explanation, for everything that's going on and so on. That it's mostly just the footage itself and text, right? And the
Yeah.
text sticks to the facts, right? Like on this day this happened, on this policy was put into place, these are the
Mm-hmm.
numbers, these are the numbers, these are the numbers.
Yeah.
And they let that inform you instead of the much easier way of like
Mm.
Morgan Freeman voiceover telling you
Yeah.
what's actually going on.
And then they show
um
you the human consequences, by interviewing both the law enforcement and the refugees and detainees.
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's really important,
Yeah.
for you to kind of see that, and you will start to notice that from people's own mouths, right?
Yeah.
From where they are situated in this kind of like furrow of chaos and kind of like madness, really,
Mm-hmm.
based off of one man's desire for power and capitalizing on people's fears.
Mm-hmm.
uh Hear from their own mouths how they truly feel,
Yep.
and I think especially for the ICE agents, how they truly feel being stuck in a system that they don't necessarily believe in or have come to believe in,
Mm-hmm.
and but they see themselves as not having a choice, right?
Yeah.
I think like very very early on in the first episode itself, one of the political commentators saying that like it's incredible
Mm.
how like these giant kind of systems
Yeah.
of terror are so far removed from the people.
Yeah, it's hidden in cogs of bureaucracy. You
Yeah,
think that you're not involved, but you are. You're just like a cog in the bureaucracy, but then you get to shift blame. It's the heartlessness lah of that system,
yeah, right. Like,
Yeah.
and I mean, like, again, right, that's what that's the same kind of story that we hear in Nazi Germany. I was just
Yeah.
following orders and all of that, and you hear a lot of that being echoed, but like the difference is this time that you see these people, right? You see
Mm.
their faces, you hear their voices when they and kind of the answers to the questions that are posed to them, and by all means, like it feels like the God's honest truth in their opinion, right? When they're sharing these things, those things
Yep.
are heartfelt, and it is mind blowing, right? To
Mm.
try and marry those two things together. There is
Mm-hmm.
a travesty that is taking place, as far as ICE is concerned and immigration is concerned in the United States, but the people
Mm-hmm.
behind it aren't evil people necessarily, right?
Yeah.
But it is used evil ends, and like trying to wrap your head around that is difficult. It is
Mm.
immensely challenging to do so, and all of that is just in the first episode.
Yeah.
Much less, going on to talk about like the Department of Justice and the power of the vote and all of that.
Hmm.
Like there is so much to dive into here that
Hmm.
it does feel a tad overwhelming.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
but it makes for a great watch. Like it is a solid TV.
Mm.
At the same time, right? Which is kind of like a rabbit hole that if you are curious and you don't mind spending a good, I think it's like 6 hours in total, right? Like it's an
6 hours.
hour,
Yeah.
yeah, 6 hours in total. Like you don't mind diving in and like kind of broadening your understanding of what exactly is
Hmm.
going on and what all these different variables and intersections of things that created this monstrosity of a situation.
Hmm.
Um, then Immigration Nation is a great watch.
Yeah, yeah, like I think to many non-Americans, the phrase or the hashtag abolish ICE, right, is one of those rallying cries that made no sense to me because I
Yeah,
didn't understand the situation.
yeah,
But I think Immigration Nation is such a comprehensive view of America's immigration policy under the Trump administration,
yeah.
that it is so informative and searing, and you're going to understand all too well why people are calling for to abolish ICE. I think, like, the filmmakers are so embedded within they got first-hand access embedded within ICE for two and a
Hmm.
half years early in the Trump administration.
Yep.
They filmed agents during a massive sweep through American cities as they look for thousands of undocumented immigrants, and then they lock them up. They follow refugee families as well who were separated at the border under an over the top kind of Trump decree. They observed bureaucrats, judges, politicians, lawyers moving undocumented individuals through deportation proceedings so prolifically that back in the day President Obama was called deporter in chief, right? Because
Yeah.
he used to deport so many people. But it's ICE just took it to a level that is unimaginable. Like this deep access and the compelling narrative that the filmmakers weave out of their footage makes Immigration Nation one of the most important Netflix documentaries about American government policy since Eva DuVernay's 13th.
Mm.
Even if it doesn't convince you that ICE should be abolished, I guarantee that you'll be unsettled by the agency's response. Like, for example, when a new sheriff takes over the demands of the country to be cleared of undocumented immigrants on a scale that's never been seen before, or careless agents just quote unquote doing their jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true that the filmmakers follow several families around. They also, on the flip side, they also follow the not just the law enforcement and the lawyers and the politicians and the judges. I mean, they also follow the immigrants. There is one, I don't know whether you've gotten to this. There's one elderly asylum seeker who is detained for fleeing gang violence. I think she's from Mexico.
Mm.
Her entire family murdered by the cartel.
Yeah.
Well, a cartel. I don't know which cartel, but like her entire family has been murdered, and she's been stuck in detention for 4 years.
Yeah.
It's horrific, and in the end she is forced to go back. It's that's clear cut asylum seeker, like
Yeah.
that's a refugee right there. Then there's a story of a former cop in El Salvador who actually worked with the NYPD. He was an undercover agent for them,
Hmm.
who worked with the NYPD to bust El Salvadoran gangs in New York. Once the gangs in El Salvador found out, he feared for his life and fled to America,
Yeah.
and he was deported anyway. And then there are the stories of war veterans, people who served the US military in Iraq, in Afghanistan, stripped of their immigration status. It's insane. And then we haven't even got to the parents separated from their underage children, like kids sobbing with chains wrapped around them, like in cages. There's a teenager deported to Mexico after spending most of his life in the US because of a traffic violation.
Hmm.
These quote unquote collaterals that picked up while ICE officers were looking for another target.
Yeah.
They go to houses, they want to find some people, and then they find a bunch of other undocumented immigrants. They're all rounded up for being at the wrong place at the wrong time because they add to the agency's numbers. Um, Such a
Yeah.
deep first-hand look at the carelessness of this particular policy and this bureaucracy. And we haven't even gotten to the immigration courts. Like, I did not know this, but you'll be surprised to learn that the criminal justice system
Hmm.
and the immigration system under Trump, they are not the same.
Yeah.
Like, the immigration courts is not court. It's not under Department of Justice. It's under the Department of Homeland Security,
Mm-hmm.
which means that they don't have to adhere to civil rights and things like that. Their Trump forces production quotas, in terms of both arrest and deportations onto judges. So they only get to keep their jobs, or they only get raises or bonuses if they deport a specific number of people.
Yeah.
Horrific. It's it's one of the most Kafka-esque things that I've seen in what I would call like dystopian America, which was basically the Trump era lah.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Any of the things that you've seen so far from Immigration Nation, at least some of the stories that stuck out to you?
I think definitely anything that has to do with like the kids, right?
Yeah.
That was really quite difficult,
Hmm.
I can't remember his name, but that one particular father who has like a 3-year old kid,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he's just standing there in this lineup against the wall in chains, and he's just like,
Mm-hmm.
talking about his child and all of that, and
Mm-hmm.
like the my personal kind of opinions on the immigration issue aside, right? I don't live in America. I'm not part of the system there.
Yeah.
Aside, like there's just so much pain involved in that particular situation. Like the immigration into America is the American dream,
Mm.
and it should exist for all. And I think back about this whole idea of did you catch Unsleeping City?
No, I've not. What's that about?
Unsleeping City is the Dimension 20 New York campaign
Oh,
that they
yes,
had.
yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so like a big part of that is talking about like the American dream and how a big part of that is the immigration story. Like with no
Mm.
immigrants, there is no American dream.
Yeah,
And
it's what's on the Statue of Liberty. Like, give me your scared, you're
right.
tired, your huddled masses, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
like like it makes me think back to just kind of like the fact that in a different era,
Mm.
under different circumstances, that's exactly who the people who are coming in, right? Like they're exactly
Mm.
these people you are deporting. They just want a better
Mm.
lives for their family,
Yeah.
and like it's heartrending to see that, and even more heartrending to
Mm-hmm.
see the things that these children and
Mm.
babies
Mm.
are subjected to because
Yeah.
someone made a policy to appease his voter base,
Mm-hmm.
and then someone down the line decided that yeah, we should just like separate them, and no one actually cares for the fact that these people are human with names and faces and families and loved ones and
Yeah.
stories and not numbers,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that therein lies the real tragedy, the
Mm.
fact that all these people, all these this large number of human beings have been reduced to numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Is the where the real tragedy of the story lies at.
Oh, definitely. One of the things that sticks out to me is that ICE, like most of the ICE officers featured in Immigration Nation, at least, are actually people of color
Yeah,
and women.
yeah.
Like the filmmakers, like I think ICE seems to have gone out of their way to make it appear that ICE themselves, the people, are culturally diverse, perhaps even more diverse than the other agencies around,
Hmm.
which is a bit of there's a bit of the cognitive dissonance that
Yeah,
some of the Latino ICE officers when they're talking,
yeah.
that is very startling.
Hmm.
There's also like as you mentioned in the beginning, the bureaucracy of America. Like there's that quote right from the immigration lawyer that said, "The brilliance of any bureaucratic system, whose
Hmm.
net result is fear and trauma, is that it's big enough to break it down in such a way that everyone just thinks that they're only moving papers or only doing a little piece."
Yeah,
It's a very perceptive insight.
yeah.
And only a very small number of people at the top design the system in such a way that like an incredible amount of terror and trauma result, but most people in the nuts and bolts are completely divorced from that. It's incredible.
Yeah.
I think in 6 episodes, Immigration Nation illustrates how seemingly disparate elements of the US immigration policy interlink to create the overall ICE system. It's a complicated thing. That's
Mhm.
why a lot of people haven't been able to get to the bottom of it. But I think like this documentary, as it captures, ICE ramping up its operations in response to Trump's election, it incisively explores how Trump's rhetoric translates into nuts and bolts
Yeah,
policy, like the logistics of it, and that's one of the brilliance of this documentary. Lah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It
Yep.
is. It is. I think it's incredibly telling
Mm.
that so much of the slowly unfolding horror
Yeah.
is heard from the ICE officers itself in this very strange, distant way, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
or not it's like a detainee asking one of I believe he's Latino
Yeah.
officers, like, "Were you born here?" Right, and he
Yeah.
says that doesn't matter now. That doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
Is his
But it
response.
does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah. It's
his it
shocking.
is
Lah.
the way in which he responds that is so telling.
Mm-hmm.
Or even I believe it's Judy who we meet in, like very early on in the
Mm-hmm.
episode, where she talks about, oh yeah, you're a human being, you get affected by it in the beginning, but you need to take your emotions out of it and all of that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it is so incredibly telling of like, especially the people on the ground. I think especially these particular officers,
Yeah.
um they struggle with what they are doing, right? Somewhere inside it sounds like they know exactly what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And as we go higher up the ladder, it becomes
Mm-hmm.
more, more official, more political.
Mm-hmm.
All the lingo comes in, all the justification comes in, and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. And it's kind of crazy to see how all of that works.
Yeah.
The little things that we kind of tell ourselves that, oh, I need to, I'm paid well, I want to, make sure that I keep my family supplied
Mm.
with the life that they're living and all of that, and I'll do these things for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts to be able to see that on screen, for sure,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then you couple that with just how well researched and planned out the documentary is.
Mm-hmm.
It's, without actually saying it, is a very devastating um look at the whole kind of like shebang
Yeah.
under the Trump administration.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, like in conclusion, I think like it has a great focus on both the policy and the intricacies of it, alongside the immigrants, their own heartaches and the structural brutality of the system, and
Yep.
I think Immigration Nation very simply asks, don't these people deserve our empathy?
Hmm.
It's a staggeringly simple question that should have an obvious answer,
Yep.
but in under the Trump administration, it wasn't so easy. It's mind-boggling, lah. It's well worth a watch, particularly because a lot of these policies have not been rolled back by Biden as promised.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I know it's very difficult for Biden to do this, because like he doesn't have all the entire Congress and stuff like that.
Yep.
But what you gonna do, like it's terrible, like the more we learn about America, the more we learn that the American dream was this absurd piece of propaganda that a lot of people believed for so long,
Hmm.
and it just isn't true, because I mean, to be honest, like if you go back to the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, the Italians and the Irish were treated much in the same way as the Mexicans and El Salvadorans were.
Yep.
It's just never been a country for immigrants by immigrants, despite the fact that the original white people are clearly immigrants.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. Oh well. Moving on. Any concluding thoughts before we move on to our final film?
No, no. I don't know if I'm looking forward to finishing this.
Yeah.
But it is definitely compelling enough for me to stick it around for another 3 hours. But I'm not sure
Mm.
if looking forward to it is the exact operative word that I would be using.
Definitely,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. A lot of these films are and series are not enjoyable, shall we say, but they are important and urgent watches, lah.
Yeah.
Particularly because this is also Refugee Week, and you should be educated about stuff like this.
Hmm.
Our final topic is one of my favorite films of this year. It takes place in Bosnia on July the 11th of 1995. It follows a character named Aida, who is a translator for the United Nations in the small town of Srebrenica. Ada is actually a real life translator. Like that, this is the story of a real translator where this happened to her.
Hmm.
And the character of Ida is loosely, very lightly fictionalized, but the story is basically the same. It follows what happens when the Serbian army takes over the small town, and her family, the translator's family, is among the thousands of citizens looking for shelter in the United Nations camp. Um, she's the UN translator, right? So she's an insider to the negotiations. So Ada has like access to crucial information that she needs to interpret, as well as maybe perhaps she can rescue her family from certain death. Quo Vadis Ada, one of the best films of 2021, and also like all these other films and series, harrowing depiction of a very very real genocide that happened in Bosnia in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
Um, and it is not just painful to watch, but also weirdly to say, quite a thrilling, high wire, ticking time bomb kind of drama.
Hmm.
Like there's a ticking clock tension to it, and it immerses you into this devastating humanism while also managing to be a thriller. It's great. I enjoyed nearly every aspect of Quo Vadis Ada, and it remains one of my favorite films of 2021. What do you think about this portrait of this massacre of the Bosnian Muslims in the 90s?
Oh man. I was incredibly invested with
Yeah.
Ada's story, right? Like the kind of struggle that she goes through. Like it she is the central focus of the entire story.
Mm-hmm.
And the way in which you follow her, quite literally,
Yeah.
there's rarely a scene without her.
Yeah.
Um, the way that you follow her and you see her struggles as a mother,
Mm.
as a translator because it's her job, as
Mm-hmm.
a member of this community, right? It is it is fraught with anxiety and nervousness and powerlessness and
Yeah.
this persistent refusal to give up, right? She would try any means
Mm.
possible, um and at moments in time, like any means possible, at the expense of anybody else, really,
Yeah.
uh to save her family, or to keep her family together, because deep down inside she knows what is about to happen, right?
Yeah.
There's an instinct that tells her that this is going to become, you know uh absolute, a shit show for,
Bloodbath.
yeah, bloodbath for
Yeah.
everybody involved, right?
Yeah.
And to follow her that way, right, in such a close manner, like even some the camera work so much of the time, like it's a lot of like close-ups of faces and dialogue when people are talking.
Mm-hmm.
Never lets up. It never lets up, and you can't help but feel what she is feeling, right? Like her performance, I don't know how to pronounce her surname,
Yeah.
but yeah, the actress who plays Ada
Ada.
is absolutely phenomenal in
Yep.
just like the way that she resonates with the emotion of that particular moment that she finds herself swept up in is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then on top of that, like, right, being able to tell the story around the context around what's happening in
Mm-hmm.
such a very raw way, right? Like nothing
Mm.
is played up. There's no, explosions for the sake of it. There's no, like, gunfire for the sake of it and all of that. Like outside of the tanks rolling in at the beginning of the movie, right? You
Yep.
don't see the actual theater of war, right?
Mm.
Like it all takes place in these negotiatings and these arguments and these banter and constellations. Like so much of it takes place in these intimate
Mm-hmm.
and important, like, moments of human interaction, right? That
Mm-hmm.
sometimes belies the fact that so much of war takes place in those moments as well.
Mm.
Whether it's negotiating with the general, whether it's, you know, arguing with her family about what's the best way going forward, her appeals to every powerful man in the building
Yeah.
to save her family over everybody else. Like all of that takes place in the realm of one-to-one human interaction, right?
Mm.
And not in the grand scale of like the tanks and the bullets and the missiles and the overall war. Um,
Mm.
which makes Quo Vadis Ada so human and so compelling at the same
Yeah.
time, right? Because it removes you from what our traditional ideas thoughts or visualizations of war is, and bringing that into a very personal human realm.
Yes, it does the same thing as nearly every of the other topics that we discuss here, lah.
Yeah.
To communicate the extent of the humanitarian crisis in Syria or in elsewhere, or in this case, a war crime like the Srebrenica massacre, which saw nearly 9,000 civilian residents, Bosnian Muslims, murdered by Bosnian Serbs in the July of 1995. It's so unfathomably horrific, right? Like, you can't imagine this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's important that you focus on one person, and in this case, Ada, and then you think about that one person and you multiply that tragedy by 8,372 times.
Hmm.
It's the exponential multiplication of horror. And I think the most inspired creative decision in this very lightly fictionalized version of true events comes from Ada herself, who is this woman, UN translator, who has this magic pass almost, that allows her to go through these barriers that means life or death for other people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
you know and the way that she goes through everyone, she talks to like you said, every powerful person from both sides, both the Serbian side and from the UN, the Dutch run UN base also.
Hmm.
Another thing that this really showcases is it truthfully, almost frankly, depicts the almost indifference or incompetence, or I don't know what the word is, impotence
Yeah.
of the United
Impotence.
Nations,
Yeah.
of the United Nations, who just failed on every promise they didn't deliver any promises.
Yeah.
They are culpable, like not inadvertently, not accidentally. They are directly culpable in the massacre of 8,000 Bosnian Muslims, to the point where their soldiers, the Dutch-run UN soldiers, shepherded these people onto buses that were led to killing fields, or killing rooms.
Yeah.
It's horrific, and to this day, the Serbian government has denied that what happened was a massacre, and it's clearly not true, which is what makes films like Quo Vadis, Ada very important
Hmm.
to watch.
Hmm.
Um, I love the scene, where where the bunch of people are translating with the general, right?
Yeah.
Her husband and everything, and then you realize that, like, the people sitting across from them are, like, some of them are, like, kids from the school,
Hmm.
friends from childhood. These are like neighbors
Yeah.
who have been turned against each other because of racial or cultural or religious divides, and it's amazing that they not amazing is the wrong word, lah. I'm incredulous that they could do this,
Yeah.
to their neighbors, to their friends, to their family, just because they happen to be of a different religion or a different culture or a different race, lah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. For me, I think the scene that stood out the most, and this is very odd and very strange. I had to take a moment
Hmm.
to kind of understand that, is when they're sitting in the office, like the four of them, the family are sitting in the office, and
Yeah.
she asks for her husband's journal
Yeah.
to get rid of it, right? And
Yeah.
he protests, saying that I've written an entry for every day of this war. This is our story,
Hmm.
and how reluctantly he hands over that journal
Hmm.
was like absolutely heartbreaking, right?
Yeah.
Because there in that book that we never get to see the contents of, right, is their story.
Yeah.
What we're seeing on screen is only a fraction of the story that's supposedly playing out, and that impacted me a lot more than I thought it would.
Mm. Hmm.
Just because, like, the getting rid of the photos and all of that, understandable. I mean, she has a good reason for that. But when it came to that journal in particular, and you see the look in the father's eyes, right, as kind of like a man of words, as a high school principal, I believe,
Yeah.
as an academic, um, he understood the power of story and of words and of just like archiving your experiences as a people,
Hmm.
and to have to give that up
Hmm.
uh, was probably the most difficult decision that he had to make in the entire story.
Hmm.
Whether or not he was giving up his place, whether to follow his sons, even though it meant death, right? All of that, right?
Hmm.
Not as difficult as him needing to give up that journal. Um,
Yes.
and that had a very profound and unexpected effect on me.
It was such a, like, small personal moment in a movie about refugees seeking refuge but unable to find refuge, right?
Yeah.
From both the this insane shot of, like, thousands and thousands of people outside the UN camp, begging to get inside, to even the people inside who are just like sitting in baking heat with no toilets, with no food and water and stuff like that. Like these are just normal people who are just who don't know what's happening. They're basically inside like an animal cage, a pig pen,
Yeah.
unknowing whether they're going to live or die. And the series of escalating sort of Sophie's choices for Ada, her job is to communicate increasingly impotent and sometimes demonstrably false, and ultimately fatal UN orders to her frightened neighbors.
Yeah.
She has to relay these insane things that the UN are saying to people who are life or death, to people who are frightened that they're gonna die. It's crazy. It's difficult for her. She's trying to save her family at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, it's one of the most thrilling, visceral, and heartbreaking movies of 2021 that I've
Mm-hmm.
seen.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not a case of historical revisionism. If anything, Quo Vadis Ada works to unrevise history. It recenters the whitewashing of the Bosnian Muslim massacre,
Mm-hmm.
and recenters it into the plight of the victims, in a storm of just like unimaginable evil. Not only the massacre itself, but the broader evils of institutional failure
Mm-hmm.
and the indifference of the international community.
Yeah.
Like when the Dutch commander, who I mean, to be fair, like the Dutch army here, like not it's not at fault. They were trying their best. They were trying to get orders from the United Nations, and then there's that one scene where they were trying to call the Security Council,
Yeah. And it
and
was vacation.
they were on vacation. Jesus Christ! And like 8,000 people are about to die here, and they just couldn't pick up the phone. It's terrible. It's terrible, and it just goes to show that how complicit the UN was in this, but
Mm.
in this in particular, lah. And it's horrific, but it's important, and quite again, lah, like all the other films and series that we've mentioned, quite an
Yeah.
urgent watch as well, lah. Yeah. Man, yeah, this like all four of these were really painful watches, but I do feel like Quo Vadis Ada one of my favorites of 2021 so far.
Yeah. Yeah. It's riveting. It's absolutely riveting watch.
Yeah,
But it
with
not
no happy ending.
with no.
There's not gonna
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know there's not gonna be a happy ending, but like even to the very last second, right? You kept hoping that her family will find a way out.
Yeah.
You kept hoping, and it just never happened. So.
And yeah, it's just this incredibly growing sense of powerlessness that you cannot shake
Yeah.
whatsoever, and it is devastating in that it's a it, the journey of it is so devastating and so well wrought out. It's kind
Mm,
of crazy. And I'm never watching this again, but I'm better for having watched it once.
definitely. And the same goes for all four of these films and series. Um, Quo Vadis Ada available on VOD right now. Immigration Nation is available on Netflix. Persepolis is available on a variety of streaming platforms. Depending on where you are, you can find it on Amazon,
Hmm.
or you can find it on Netflix, or it depends on what territory you're in, lah. And what's the second film that we
For
talked
summer.
about? For Summer is available in Singapore on I Wonder, and the Projector Plus. So, great overall. We will be back in a couple of weeks for
Yeah.
genre equality 43, I believe.
Are we at
Yeah.
43 already? Yes, that's right,
Yeah.
43.
We have lots to talk about. In particular, I'll be one of our main topics, of course, is Star Wars: The Bad Batch, which Isa will be covering.
Hmm.
I'll be talking about Luca, Disney and Pixar's latest animated feature.
Yep.
One of our main topics, of course, is Sweet Tooth, which is getting a lot of hype. One of the Netflix, summer hits, a bit like
Mm.
how Stranger Things was a few years ago.
Yep.
And of course, A Quiet Place Part Two, which we were looking forward to. Um, Maybe a bit disappointed with it, but we'll get
Yeah,
we'll get
we'll
into
we'll
that
get
later.
into that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And towards the end, I will be following up on Isa's anime corner with my own anime corner, because I spent, if you don't live in Singapore, you probably won't know, but the last 4 weeks we've been under quarantine again. It's phase two heightened alert, whatever it's called. So
Yeah.
the no dining in severely like decreased my social activity. So I stayed home.
Uh-huh.
I watched a lot of anime. I watched Steins Gate. I watched Steins Gate Zero. I watched the Steins Gate movie. I watched all 3 seasons of Fruit Baskets. And I caught up with Isa's top four recommendations, which are To Your Eternity, VV, Fluoride's Eye Song, Art Taxi, and Mars Red, which are all as good as Isa says. So we'll get a bit deeper into that in the upcoming
Yeah.
genre equality. Yeah.
Yeah. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, definitely. You know,
Yeah.
lots of other things as well. Tressy will be talking about Record
Mm.
of Ragnarok, the Conjuring Tree, which, as it turns out, saying that you were possessed is not a valid legal defense. And also, Isa will be reviewing a local
Yep.
audio drama called Sacred Guardians. I have no
Hmm.
idea what it's about. We got a press release for it, so we'll catch that, and we'll tell you what we think about it.
Yep.
In a couple of weeks, as always, Genre Equality pops up on the first of every month.
Hmm.
We'll be recording this next week, so can't wait for that, man.
Yeah, for sure. Again, guys, just a friendly reminder that we are also now on YouTube.
Mm,
If you've gotten
yeah,
to this section of the podcast and you are listening to us on YouTube, please drop us a like, a subscribe, share it with
yeah,
your friends because that helps us out a lot in terms of visibility.
yeah,
And we hope it's been a convenient option for you guys if you're listening to us on YouTube.
definitely, man. Yeah,
Yeah, we will be looking into expanding our reach on other platforms as well. So stick around for some news in the future.
awesome. Till next time, this has been Hit Zero.
I'm Isa.
Goodbye, guys.
Ciao.